Am I right in thinking, because as a player and at the start of his coaching career as well, he's very much a creation of Arrigo Sacchi. And he's very, very, that 4-4-2.
Absolutely.
And there are so many virtues that he has from the point of view of taking this new job. One is that he was an absolute top-class player. And I always thought this at the time, that Italy would have stood a far better chance of winning the 1990 World Cup had he not been injured during the competition. Because he was a midfield enforcer who could play. He was a good player. And then he from Roma he goes through Milan, and the 4-4-2, which was revolutionary, what Sacchi was doing. And he also has experience in international football on the managerial side, because he was the assistant to Sacchi in the World Cup in '94 and I think in Euro '96 as well. And then he branches out on his own as a coach, and I can't remember what club it is, but he's got Roberto Baggio. It's the club where he has Roberto. Yeah, it's the club where
it's the club where he didn't sign Baggio.
Right.
It was when he was at Parma. He didn't sign Baggio. He was offered Baggio.
Right.
And he had a conversation with Baggio and said, I don't think you'll fit in with us because where am I going to play you?
Exactly. And so after that, he comes to the conclusion that if he can't fit Baggio into his team, the problem is not Baggio, the problem is his system. Yeah. And then he embarks on this open-minded journey when he frees himself from the shackles of only thinking in 4-4-2 and ends up being able to adapt any team to the talent that he's got at his disposal.
He came to that when he moved to Juventus. That's when the light bulb moment happened, because he was given Zidane, and he said, "How do I fit Zidane into this? I can't play him on the left side of midfield. I can't. What do I need to do with this guy?" And
he's not quick enough to play left side of midfield.
He can't do this, he can't do that, but he can do all this thing and basically win everything for us. So I think that's when he's gradually worked in it. And one of the lines he uses in the current book that we're doing together is he was mentored and influenced by Sacchi, and he goes through the list of people he was influenced by, and then he says, but I had to design. I couldn't model myself on those. I had to be an Ancelotti model, not a clone or anything like that. And the interesting thing about the 4-4-2 though is that when I interviewed him at the start, I said, if you could have any player in the world, what system would you play? 4-4-2. I said, oh, what? Why is that? This is classic Ancelotti, by the way. Why is that? Well, it's the shape of the pitch.
Yeah.
You're like,
he's got a point. He has
good point, Carlo. Excellent point and well made.
That's why it's probably been the most long-lasting and successful system of all time.
Yeah, because it can expand and contract backwards and forwards. Good point, Carlo, and well made. And let's move on. What would you want for dinner?
He sounds like a bit of a philosopher of the game as well, and I think we get that, don't we? That he's somebody who thinks a lot. But even though, and I like the way that Tim described if there's a problem, it's not Roberto Baggio. It's
that's good. That's a great line. I will steal it, obviously, Tim.
No, we've all stolen his stuff in the past. We may as well continue. But
I've stolen from many myself. We're all magpies in this game.
You're going to owe me for that one. But anyway, no, I'm fascinated by the way that he accepts that he is not perfect. How does that affect his personal relationship then with players? Because we know, and one of the questions that I got yesterday on the radio at the BBC was, no, sorry, it wasn't. It was somewhere else. Anyway, one of the questions I got was, how many of Brazil's current players are not going to play the way Carlo Ancelotti wants them to play? Whether that's a fair question or not. But, he has a personal relationship with players, and I wonder to what extent. For example, I saw when he was managing at Chelsea, there was one point when David Luiz, the great Brazilian centre-back, I think was responsible for a goal. At least that's the way Carlo Ancelotti saw it from the coach's angle. And he looked across with his wiry, upper eyebrow as well. He arched his eyebrow in the way that he does. And David Luiz is looking across to him. And you could see David Luiz saying, "Not me, it wasn't me." And Carlo Ancelotti's. So I am fascinated about what kind of relationship he has with players, personally.
I think the best description of it that I had when we did the book, I obviously interviewed a lot of players and said, what's special about him. And John Terry said that, and so this is relevant to Chelsea. John Terry said that one of the interesting things was that in a 2-hour training session, there would only be about 30 to 35 minutes that was full on. The rest of the time was more relaxed, but he had this simple phrase that they got used to where he'd say, "It's serious now." And all the players were like, "Oh, hold up, here we go." right. And it would be full on, and then it would finish, and then they go away. And so, he's got an interesting. I mean, I'm a punctuality freak, but he said that his view is like, I'm going to say we're going to meet at 9 o'clock. If all the players say they want to meet at 10, let's meet at 10. But you have to be there at 10. So there's a level of flexibility. But once we've all agreed this, actually, then you better be there. And if you're not there, you ain't playing. Because we had the agreement. So that applies to how everything goes through. So he looks at Vinicius, for example, at the moment and says, I think there's a fascinating bit where I was watching training, and they were trying to get him to take his first touch more centrally. Okay, because basically, if you keep taking your touch on the wide, and you end up being Grealish, and sort of let's turn back,
especially if you're playing on the wrong wing.
Yeah, exactly.
You're going into less space,
Exactly. And so to get into an area where you can finish, you got to beat two players. But if you take your first touch on, fairly centrally, you might only have to take one more touch, or you might be able to finish from a single touch. So he was working on that. And so when there were all questions about when Mbappe came, and they said, how will we fit this in? He said, are you going to drop Vinicius, so that you can play Mbappe out there? No, why would I drop him? He's the one who often makes the difference. So what we're trying to do is work on him to do X, Y, and Z. And then I asked another question about Mbappe. I said, Mendes getting into really great positions here, not crossing it. And he said, Mbappe's not ready for that yet. He hasn't got the idea of getting in front of the first man, but we're working on that. So if you think about it, you got the two best players in the world. And you're still working at it.